Fourth oral question, Baroness McIntosh of Pickering.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, following parliamentary approval, the Highway Code was revised on the 29th of January 2022 to include alterations to improve safety for cyclists, pedestrians and horse riders. Changes relating to the use of handheld mobile phones in vehicles were laid before Parliament on the 1st of February. Further changes covering the use of self-driving vehicles are planned and will be laid before both Houses of Parliament later this year.
My Lords.
My Lords, would it not be a good idea to present all the changes to the Highway Code and consult on them in one go to prevent a piecemeal approach? Do I not have the expectation as a pedestrian to be able to walk safely on our pavements without the risk of being mown down by e-scooters? For what reason are e-scooters still excluded from the Highway Code? And when does my noble friend and the department imagine that death and injury caused by cyclists and e-scooters will be put on the same basis as other motoring offences?
Many questions to which I hope to give at least some response. I'm grateful to my noble friend. Look, my Lords, if we could bring everything together and lay it before Parliament at once, that would be marvellous. But the reality is that these things happen over a period of time. We don't want to delay certain elements which we can get out of the door. So, for example, noble Lords will know that we changed the Highway Code back in 2021 to make some changes for smart motorways to include red X stoppages and things like that. So we continue, and we have continued, and we will continue to change the Highway Code because matters on our roads are developing very quickly at the moment. My noble friend raises e-scooters, which, as noble Lords know, are temporarily or currently illegal, except for the temporary trials, and therefore that is why they are not in the Highway Code.
My Lords.
Baroness, tell the House, to what extent does she think motorists understand the new Highway Code?
Well, actually, there's been a huge amount of coverage of the new Highway Code, for which we are extremely grateful. There will continue to be coverage. But, my Lords, there's been an awful lot of hot air as well, I'm afraid, because the changes are actually not that significant. It is already the case that if, as a pedestrian, you start to cross the road, you have priority. You already have priority. There has been no change in that regard. And in terms of cyclists, there was already guidance as to about where a cyclist should ride on the road. And actually, we're just clarifying what is reasonable and what is not. So I am content that there is an awful lot of coverage at the moment. There will be more coverage, paid-for coverage, by the department when we launch our campaign.
My Lords.
That the government is considering as a so-called Brexit freedom, refusing to implement EU standards on better sight lines for buses and lorries so that they do not crush cyclists and pedestrians, and better braking for cars. Did taking back control mean more dangerous roads and less safe vehicles? This seems in direct contribution to the alleged purpose of the changes in the Highway Code.
Well, I'm grateful to the noble lady for raising that matter. I think what she's talking about, although I suspect there's a few things muddled up there, is the EU safety package. Is that what she's referring to? That, of course, has not come in yet mandated in the EU. Ministers are considering what we will do. We will make the right decision for the safety of everybody on British roads. It's got nothing to do with Brexit or otherwise, quite frankly. Actually, we'll be deciding for ourselves.
My Lords.
Me, that smart motorways are one of the great oxymorons of the present day.
I'm grateful to my noble friend for raising one of my favourite topics, but the noble lord will know that we have done an enormous amount of work on smart motorways. They are one of our most scrutinised roads in the country, perhaps even in the world. We have committed that we will not continue to construct new smart motorways until we have all of the safety data from those opened from 2020 onwards, which will be in 2025. At that point, we will consider where we take smart motorways. But it is the case that they are as safe, if not safer, in a vast majority of the metrics that we use to look at safety on our roads.
My lords, can the noble lady, the minister, the
The Highway Code has already been amended, and I regret to comment with a great deal of criticism from those involved. Are further amendments proposed?
Absolutely, and I'm not sure I agree with my noble friend about criticism. The reality is there were 21,000 people who responded, for example, to the most recent change to the Highway Code. 70% of those self-identified as motorists, and it is the case that between 68 and 96% of them agreed with the various elements that we put in place. So I recognise that there are concerns raised. I'm happy to address those concerns raised, but I do not think that this change is a poor one. And yes, to answer my noble friend's question, there will be more changes coming, as I've said out.
My Lords, can the noble lady, the Minister, explain why recommendations proposed by British Cycling to explain reasons for and protect the right to cycle two abreast, which were Rules 66, 154 and 213, were not adopted in full? Won't this omission lead to many drivers to still question the right of people cycling side by side, which is safer for all road users? Will the Minister agree to meet representatives of British Cycling and Cycling UK to look at this again?
I'm afraid I won't commit to meet the cycling lobby again, because the reality is there was an opportunity for all of the stakeholders to input into the consultation. It is the case that a correct balance has been met. The motorist organisations were there as well, and we are content with where we have resolved the situation around riding two abreast, where we say you can ride two abreast, but be aware of drivers behind you and let them pass. It is about getting all people on our roads to act in a very safe and considerate manner.
Yeah. My Lords, my Lords, I'm appalled that the Minister finds the criticism of the Highway Code, and particularly how it's been introduced, as just hot air. I'm very sorry she is content. I believe she should be deeply dissatisfied. To dismiss the changes in the Highway Code as not significant is almost as if she has not read them. It's a very important modification. It requires road users to do things differently. It means different people have different rights of way. And if there isn't adequate, don't shake your head, it's exactly what it requires. And the situation where one road user and another road user both believe they have the right of way is potentially catastrophic. My Lords, the changes to the Highway Code are designed to make the roads safer, but they are completely undermined by the lack of public awareness. The Department for Transport said they will begin launching an awareness campaign in February. Has this now been launched, and why did ministers not begin the campaign prior to their introduction?
My Lords, there is hot air and misinformation around this change to the Highway Code. I'm not going to lie. That's absolutely true. And there have also been situations which have existed for decades. As I've already pointed out, these are quite minor changes, where the priority, where it says should. And if the Highway Code said should, it doesn't mean you are required to do anything. If it says must, you are required to do that thing. So there's always a question, and has been since the start of the Highway Code, I believe earlier in the last century, whereby different people will sometimes actually have to agree as to who's going to go first. That's just life. But in terms of the communications, as the noble Lord will know, we've had quite a lot of coverage on non-paid-for communications channels, which is what we're focusing on at the moment, and indeed the Think campaign, which will be a paid-for £500,000 campaign, will start very shortly. We will continue over summer as various different types of modes tick up in their usage.
My Lords, I would like to ask my noble friend the Minister what the government is doing to make it safer for pedestrians, and in particular, how the government is going to enforce all road users to stop at red lights, particularly cyclists.
Well, I agree with my noble friend. I think some cyclists are absolutely outrageous, where they look at red lights and assume that they are not compulsory. And indeed, the government is, of course, doing the roads policing review, which we will publish in due course. But the whole point about these changes to the Highway Code is that they do make things safer for pedestrians. As I've already pointed pointed out, pedestrians already had priority if you had started to cross the road. There was no change there, but there have been some other minor changes which will make things clearer for pedestrians, and it will make it safer for pedestrians.
Could the Minister bring clarification?
Department considered country roads for cyclists riding abreast. I live in Devon, and I can tell you the roads are extremely narrow. They're used by cars, by a lot of horses, and of course by vehicles.
Many noble lords will have heard me raise this point before, and I'm extremely concerned about rural roads because my view is that sometimes on rural roads it can seem like motorists seem to think that they have precedence, and they don't. And that really, really concerns me. So we are very clear about cyclists. So if you're riding in a rural road, or indeed any road, we say ride in the centre if it is quiet, or if there is slow-moving traffic, or if you're approaching a junction. That's what we say. And if you're on a rural road, then of course one would move aside at some point if there was a car waiting behind you. But if you are travelling at 30 miles an hour in a car behind a cyclist that is travelling at 15 miles an hour in a car, and you are delayed for a mile, just 1 mile, you have lost 2 minutes of journey time. My lords, I sometimes think that on rural roads especially, we need to be more cognizant of the users there, not only cyclists, but also horse riders.